as you know, because I did a review of the book and wrote a piece for it, I was quite impressed with it. Extremely well written. It's documented. It has what we call multimodal methodologies, excellent theoretical references, etc. And I think it's put together extremely well. And as far as its a place in the world today, I think it's an extremely important piece. I should mention right away that there was an article in the New York Times today about two new books on Wagner. It's called Death is Our Business, is one of them, and it's called Russian Mercenaries and the New Era of Private Warfare. And then the other one is Putin's Sledgehammer, the Wagner Group and Russia's Collapse into Mercenary Chaos, which I think is a bit wishful thinking. Again, I don't know these two people, but also in terms of a review in the New York Times basically tends to represent the New York State Department's position on most things. So it's not usually as how should I say, unbiased as it ought to be in terms of looking at scholarly work. Yeah. And I didn't read those two books, but I read the article about the two books, and it touches upon many of the things that are dealt with by Oleg in the book. I think it's also missing a few things because it doesn't have, at least from my point of view, doesn't have the theoretical insight that Oleg has about basically any subject. He just brings in so many different things to it that some people might find a bit stressful. Actually, because it challenges. It's something which challenges one's ideas about warfare, about conflict, about government, about the conduct of conflict. Yeah. I think Kushner's kind of is more of an overview, more of a general analysis of the situation. But Oleg's, I think, is more to the point, and for me at least, the most important aspect of it. I mean, the kinds of things that I thought were unique in the book, and I'm sure that Harvey and Oleg were working in conjunction with each other in terms of how to approach it, et cetera. But the idea that private military contracts, the PMCs, are employed, okay, used. Employed may or may not be. That's a big problem. In other words, the idea of how they're funded can be a bit murky. But the way how they are used in order to do things that the people who back the mercenaries, right, the private military contractors. Remember, the private military contract is not doing something for itself. It's doing something for those who employ them, right? And so it's this possibility of deniability or responsibility because if it's a government or it's a corporation that is using the PMC, they're using them to do things that they couldn't do themselves. At least they couldn't do themselves publicly, right? Couldn't do themselves publicly. So we have PMCs, for example, for oil exploration and other mineral exploration corporations, et cetera, around the world, right? And it's also the analysis that they provide, I believe, makes it possible for one to see the same kinds of things going on for organizations that we ordinarily would not think of. For example, although it's not talked about in the book, it made me think about organizations like ISIS, terrorist organizations, right? Which you can be thought of as acting on behalf of interests of one sort or another that are hidden, right? And we see again that's an important, extremely important part of the book is we can't do this publicly, we can't admit to be doing this, so therefore we hire these people. It also implies, again, doesn't make explicit, but implies and that's what good about an excellent analysis, right? It implies that there are organizations like this of which we are unaware, right? So they don't have to advertise, right? So PMC Wagner, for example, has done lots and lots of things, but they don't necessarily take credit for everything that they do, right? Those are, I think, extremely important things that Harvey and Oleg are able to get across. I think certainly so. If it's taken um, by not only scholars, professors, a lot of professors are not particularly interested in doing deep dives into research, etc. But if they read the book and understand the lessons that it have and convey that to their students. In other words, when I went to Indiana University in the days when probably the dinosaurs were still alive, when I was an undergraduate, so long ago, 60 years ago, I took a course on the sociology of war, right? And I'm assuming that today there are many more courses that are being offered then. Then it was in the middle of the or the beginnings of the early days of the Vietnam conflict, from the French to the Americans, etc., and shortly after the Korean War. And so today it seems to me that there's war going on all over the place. Whether it's extremely hot or it's a warm war, or a cold war, etc. And so there should be many, many courses, and something like this, talking about private military contractors and the way that not only are they used, but how they are used. I think if it's pitched towards those kinds of things, in other words, towards humanities and social science courses that talk about war and global conflict, I think it would be extremely useful because it provides an inside look at it, not just simply an external look. I think what's happening now, you're aware of what's going on in your part of the world, right? But this kind of warfare, this kind of conduct of war, is increasing. It's not decreasing. And in fact, in the future, I see this is a potential. All right, I see. Because deniability is so important for governments and for corporations and other interests in terms of what they are doing. We see in terms of warfare now, we see drones, we see technology, we see robotics, etc. I think that's the next step, right? So which makes it even more opaque. One has no idea, whose this is, and I would see the involvement, if we want to extend our view to organizations, like the oligarchs who are in control of the media and the internet, because that's where it has to take place. You're talking about satellites, private satellites that we have, etc. All of this stuff is governed by that. In other words, when we're talking about warfare, they're relying on these corporate entities in order to conduct their activities. I don't know, again, whether you realize it or not. If we look at the conflict in Gaza, we know that the Israeli government has very, very good access and cooperation with US and UK intelligence agencies to read what it is and to listen to and to watch what it is that people how people communicate with each other. And then information then gets transferred to a drone or to some other kind of semi-autonomous weaponry. So that I think that's where it's going. Yeah, I think that's the crucial statement. From the book, it would even be the summary of why the book is of value and think why it is written. So it's not something which is only about the conflict that's going on in Eastern and Central Europe, right? So it's talking about what can happen anywhere, right? It can be applied anywhere. And governments, I think, are already aware of this, but I don't think the public is, right? I think the public still is thinking in terms of, well, the United States government is doing this, the Israeli government is doing that, the Russian government is doing this, the Ukraine government, et cetera. They think about it at that particular level and not understanding that there are many layers of conflict, many layers of conflict. I read all kinds of press. I even watch RT, which I know lies like crazy. But you have to look at how organizations, propaganda is propaganda, right? But you have to look at it in order to understand what's going on, right? So now there's an incident that's taking place. It's being reported in two different ways in the Western press and of course in the Russian press, right? So it's about a Ukrainian citizen in Germany, I think, that was caught, planning to do something. Now, first, well, Ukraine is it doing it for Ukraine? Is it doing it for Russia? Is it doing it for Germany, etc.? You really have no idea. You really have no idea. And of course, the person who is involved in these kinds of activities, whether it's a group of mercenaries in West Africa, where Wagner had sent and other groups had sent. You should realize that the French Foreign Legion is a semi PMC, right? Pseudo government organizations. The CIA, it's all these kind of things take place. One has to realize that these kinds of things are going on, and I think they will increasingly go on, right? Especially true if you want to make a prediction. You can say Professor Krase said this. That the threat of nuclear war increases the likelihood of this happening because no one wants to be caught. No government, no corporation wants to be caught red-handed, as we say it, doing something extremely damaging, like blowing up oil refineries or killing a bunch of civilians because there was one terrorist on the bus. They don't want to be caught doing that because what happens is it escalates. It escalates. So I think definitely so. The importance of that phrase is that I think there will be increasing of this kind of activity globally, not just by the big powers, but the small powers also. It's important to do that. In other words, to look at the past where these things have emerged from, where they've appeared before, the references, to organized crime, these are all important for us to understand the context of this, right? So that's what I meant by multimodal, right? So you're talking about interviews, you're talking about observations themselves, you're talking about reading literature on things. You're talking about historical analysis, etc. So that's the modern way of doing socio-political economic research, because you need all the many different points of view. What adds to it is the two scholars have different approaches also, and so that helps as well. I think people who are interested in this increasingly important global issue, they ought to be reading this book. And not only will the content of the book be of value, but the directions that the book points to are also important, right? So they're looking at closely at a particular thing, but it expands, and so one should be able to see in the book analogous situations to elsewhere.